Hey everyone, and welcome to Travel Through Stories. My name is Sean, and I'm really bad at sticking to TBRs, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. However, at the end of the year, I do like to set some plans in motion. These plans are never set in stone. I'm a mood reader and always have been and always will be. But I do like to gather some hopefuls, and the kinds of books that I do like to gather at the end of the year are the big books that I want to spend my time on. The short books I can mood read and flow between pretty easily, but I think having a little bit of structure with the large books that I want to get to seems like a good idea at least. And I'm defining big book here as any book over like 500 pages, though some of these are more than double that. I made a video back, I think at the end of 2021, where I did this for the next year, and you can go back and watch that if you want to see how few of the books I actually got to. I think I got to about half, which wasn't too bad. But perhaps making this video will be an encouragement for me to get to all of these books, but it might also encourage you to get to all of these books, which then might encourage me if you then tell me that these books are good and worth it or not worth it. Anyways, just a couple more things about this list. The first 10, I believe, have been published in the last couple of months or are coming out in the first half of 2024. And the last 5 are just ones that have been on my shelf for quite some time and I want to get to them. And further, most of these books are in translation. I think only 4 of them are originally in English, so prepare for a masterclass in me mispronouncing authors' names. And lastly, I should note for transparency's sake that quite a few of these books were sent to me by the publishers as either early review copies or finished copies. And I'll try to make clear which ones as I go through them, just because, I don't know, that might change your opinions of my thoughts on them. But anyways, let's just dive in. The first big book that I really want to get to early in 2024 is The Obscene Bird of Night by José Donoso. I've actually had a copy of this novel for a couple of years, but what has driven me to put it at the very top of my TBR is that New Directions is publishing an unabridged version of it in early 2024, and they kindly sent me this ARC. I've had this copy on my shelf for quite some time, and I didn't even know that this was abridged, but apparently when this novel was being translated to English, Donoso took the opportunity to go through and cut out some sections and trim it down a little bit. So this new unabridged, amended translation re-expands the novel back to what it was when it was originally published in Spanish. Donoso is a Chilean writer of the sort of Latin boom era, and I often find I really enjoy these novels by the authors of the Latin boom, but I find them very intimidating to start. But Donoso is ranked very highly among the Latin boom era and the post-Latin boom era. He's been praised by authors like Carlos Fuentes, etc. I'm not going to try to summarize this book at all because every review I have read makes me more confused and I feel like I know less about what it's actually about. But it seems gothic and grotesque and phantasmagoric, surreal, nightmarish, magical realist, etc. It sounds like an absolutely wild ride, and one that will probably take a lot out of the reader, but every review that I've read suggests that it gives a lot back to the reader as well. And if this sounds interesting, I'd highly recommend, of course, to pre-order a copy, but I'd also recommend going and checking out Jorge's review over on the channel Jorge's Corner. He did an excellent review. He has a ton of excellent reviews, but he did a great review of this novel, and I promise that you'll want to pre-order it after watching that review. Number 2 on my list is Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. This was published just this year by Giramondo over in Australia, but it's being published in the States by, I think, New Directions, and in the UK by And Other Stories early in 2024. Now, I was introduced to Alexis Wright just earlier this year when I read her novels Carpentaria and The Swan Book, and Carpentaria especially absolutely blew me away. She quickly rose to being one of my favorite living authors. Carpentaria is easily one of my favorite books of the year, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. It's absolutely brilliant. She writes in this like dreamy and mythic prose with pretty long sentences and long paragraphs where she elevates Australia to a land of myth. She often writes about indigenous groups in Australia. She's indigenous herself. And yeah, she's really just a brilliant author that I don't see enough people talking about. Go read Carpentaria if you want to know what I'm talking about, or wait for Praiseworthy, I guess. But I'll reiterate that Carpentaria is fantastic, probably in my top books of 2023 video as well. Needless to say, when this book was published in Australia, I immediately ordered a copy and had it imported. Though again, it is being republished in the US and in the UK in early 2024. But let me actually just read the opening sentence from this novel because I quite like it. Once upon a fine time for some people in the world, but not so spontaneous nor perfect for others, there lived a culture dreamer obsessing about the era. He was no great dreamer, no greater than the rest of the juggernauts in his heartbroken, storm country people's humanity. It sounds like a brilliant novel. She's a fantastic writer, and I highly, highly recommend checking out either her backlog or waiting and picking up Praiseworthy. Praiseworthy actually seems quite similar to Carpentaria in that it's taking place in a small town in northern Australia. The Aboriginal people are struggling against their colonizers. There's a mystic visionary threatening to upset, well, everything. And all of this is told, it seems, in a mythic manner that suggests apocalypse. It sounds fantastic. I can't wait for it. Number 3 on my list is Chevengur by Andrey Platonov. This is a long-awaited new translation of a novel that many readers place among the very best of the 20th century Soviet novels, or at least novels that were banned in the Soviet Union. I don't know if calling it a Soviet novel is a good idea, considering Stalin, I believe, read some of Platonov's work and just called it scum, so that sounds pretty cool. This novel is a surrealistic depiction of a dystopia, probably pretty obviously modeled on the Soviet Union to some extent. It seems to be very much about dystopia and the quest for utopia, and all the political and social apparatus that of course has to go with that quest. This all sounds really interesting, but what really draws me to this novel is that I've heard that Platonov's language is in a class of its own, and that he creates an entire world through his unique use of language. I've read quite a few reviews of different translations into different languages, and a lot of people complain that the translators can't quite capture Platonov's original idiosyncratic and playful and inventive use of language. It's one of those books that seems almost impossible to capture the style and therefore the world that this novel creates through its language. But I have heard that this translation by Robert Chandler and Elizabeth Chandler comes pretty darn close to that. And thank you to NYRB for the copy. I plan to get to this quite soon. I'm hoping to read this one over winter break. Number 4 on my list is The Case of Cem by Vera Mutafchieva. Apologies for the undoubted mispronunciation. This one was sent to me by the publisher, Sandorf Passage, though this seems like exactly the kind of book that I love. This is a very highly regarded Bulgarian classic that is finally getting translated into English. It's about the transition of power in the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century, and it's told entirely in a series of court documents and court testimonies. It seems to blend medieval history and the courtroom drama. And I have said it on this channel 100 times, but I love polyphonic novels like this. But what strikes me as particularly interesting about how this novel does it is that each subsequent testimony, of course, complicates the main thing that the court is debating. It complicates the case more and more with each subsequent testimony, offering new ways of approaching this struggle for power and continuing to complicate this main central character who is sort of lost by history. Cem is the third or second, I forget, son of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Mehmed the Conqueror. And when Mehmed dies, there is a push to have Cem inherit the Sultanate by certain factions. And so this book is really about the tensions between these groups, some who support Cem and some who support Mehmed's firstborn son. And Cem traveled all around Europe and has the support of a whole bunch of different European kingdoms who really want him to inherit, of course, because then they'll have some sort of political sway over the Ottoman Empire. And so it seems that this novel is really interested in that struggle for power between East and West, Muslim and Christian, and these sorts of power struggles that were going on at the time and still continue to this day. This novel looks fantastic and is published by a pretty small press, so I strongly encourage you to go and pre-order this book. We need to continue to encourage small presses to take translations, to take the risks of translating, a 550-page Bulgarian novel into English. It's definitely a risk that they're taking, and we need to continue to reward these small publishers for doing this. Number 5 on my list is Lies and Sorcery by Elsa Morante. This was also sent to me by NYRB, so thank you to them. But this is the first translation of this classic epic Italian novel that came out in Italy, I think in 1948. And it quickly became a classic. This novel apparently was very influential on authors like Elena Ferrante. And in fact, that Elena Ferrante connection is of course what drove me to want to pick up this novel so quickly as well. It's a generational epic set in Sicily across 3 different generations. And it looks like it's filled with that melodrama, those family secrets, that intrigue, all the while set against the backdrop of the shifting political landscape of Sicily. That is, it sounds like an Elena Ferrante novel, which is a good thing for me. I love getting lost in these epics. The Naples of the Neapolitan novels really came to life, and I'm really hoping that this novel brings Sicily to life in a similar way. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading this almost 800-page epic. Right, number 6 is a novel that I don't actually have a copy of, though I do have it pre-ordered, and that is The Children of the Dead by Elfriede Jelinek. I read some Jelinek before. I read her novel Fury, though I plan to read more before this translation comes out. The Children of the Dead is often considered her magnum opus, and it is very probably one of the main reasons why she won the Nobel Prize in literature in 2004. But it's never been translated into English before, and it seems like the main reason why it hasn't been translated into English is because it's one of those books that is very difficult to translate. The Nobel Committee cites her extraordinary linguistic zeal in their award. The Children of the Dead is a massive, epic, horror or gothic novel, which the blurb calls a spectral journey through the catastrophic history embedded in the landscape of Austria. It sounds like an absolutely wild book in that phantasmagoric mode that I love, while also being a sort of exorcism of history. What I have read of Jelinek is angry and passionate and just very intense, and this seems like it is her most intense novel, so I cannot wait to get my hands on this copy. I think it comes out in just a couple of months. And it also seems like it's her most linguistically dense, which is quite cool. I'm very excited to see what she does in this novel. The next up is The End by Attila Bartas. Now, I haven't read much Hungarian literature, but every bit of Hungarian literature that I have read has blown me away. And so I was very keen to get to this new translation of this massive Hungarian novel, which was published by Archipelago Books just a couple of months ago, and they very generously sent me this copy. This novel takes place in communist Hungary in the 20th century, and it seems to be pretty autobiographical, and it really falls into that genre of the Kunstliterroman. The main character is a photographer, and this novel seems like it's actually structured like a series of photographs. There are these small, short chapters, just a couple of pages long, and there are each these sort of vignettes, these sort of pictures of a specific moment, a specific memory, and as you continue to read, you get, well, the rest of the photo book. The series of photographs build up to create a holistic life of the character and of Hungary. It looks really wonderful, and I read a few reviews in Hungarian through Google Translate, of course, and this novel seems very highly regarded in Hungary. Speaking of Hungarian literature, though, number 8 on my novel is actually 2 books, and it is the new 2-volume memoir by Peter Nadash, Shimmering Details, Volume 1 and 2. Peter Nadash is a really fascinating contemporary author. I spent a good portion of the last couple months of 2021, I believe, reading his massive almost 1,200-page novel, Parallel Stories. And I've been keen to get back to Nadash ever since. He writes these massive novels that a lot of people hate and some people really, really love. I think Susan Sontag called one of his books, The Book of Memories, the greatest novel written in our time and one of the very best books of the century. But his novels are, at least in my experience of reading Parallel Stories, which is his longest to be fair, these massive, sprawling, messy novels that are sort of all over the place, and they tie these strands together across time and space. It's very messy, but I happen to fall into the camp of someone who really enjoys those kinds of novels, though I realize that they're not for everyone. And so this new 2-volume set is a memoir. Peter Nadash was born in Budapest in the midst of World War II. He was a baby during the Siege of Budapest, and he was there during the Hungarian Revolution, and he's lived most of his life sort of in that city. And so this memoir seems very much about Budapest, especially in the second and third quarters of the 20th century. And it really looks like a brilliant companion to his fiction, but a a magnum opus in and of itself, as this thing is like 1,000 pages. I'm really looking forward to digging into this someday. I really like Nadash's prose, so hoping to get to that this year. Oh, and I should note that these were sent to me by FSG, so thank you, FSG. Number 9 on my list is another one that I don't have quite yet, which is Marshlands by Otohiko Kaga, and this is being published by Doki Archive in early 2024. Now, I know almost nothing about this book and nothing about the author, other than the fact that I've had this novel on pre-order since the day it was announced. It is a 960-page epic set on the island of Hokkaido for the most part, but it spans a significant portion of the 20th century in Japan. Otohiko Kaga died just earlier this year in 2023, I think back in January, and he doesn't seem to have much of a following in the Anglophone world, but he seems like he was very highly regarded in Japan, and I think that this is only his second novel to be translated into English. Marshland is described in the blurb as an epic on a Tolstoyan scale, running from the pre-World War II era to the turbulence of Japan in the 1960s. And so yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I'm kind of going in blind with this one. It looks sprawling and great. I spent quite a bit of my last month reading some Japanese classics by Kenzaburo Oe and Yasunari Kawabata, and so I'm really excited to dig into a proper, almost 1,000-page epic from Japan. Okay, and number 10 is Divine Days by Leon Forrest. I have only heard wonderful things about Leon Forrest, and Divine Days seems like it's his magnum opus. This novel was just republished this year in this beautiful, gorgeous and just gigantic edition. I mean, it's so big that they were able to put Toni Morrison's blurb on the spine of it. Just incredible. It's over 1,100 pages, and in lieu of describing this book, I'm just going to do the incredibly lazy booktuber thing of just reading the blurb that the publisher offers. They say that Divine Days is a kaleidoscopic whirl of characters, language, music, and Black experience. With a structure inspired by James Joyce and jazz, Leon Forrest folds references to African American literature and cinema, Shakespeare, the Bible, and classical mythology into a heady quest that embraces life in all of its tumult and adventure. I mean, it sounds quite brilliant. And again, I've only heard amazing things about Leon Forrest, and I'm really looking forward to, at some point, I don't know, carving out 6 to 8 weeks to dig into this novel. Right, so the next 5 novels aren't new releases or reissues or anything like that, but they're ones that have been on my shelf for quite some time, and I just want to talk about them. The first one being Gate of the Sun by Elias Khoury. And again, apologies for the mispronunciation. Now, these past few months, for reasons that I hope are pretty self-evident, I've been looking for more Palestinian authors to read, or authors who write about Palestine. And I keep coming across 3 different names. Adania Shibli, whose Minor Details I read, I think, just a month or 2 ago, which is brilliant, highly recommended if you can get your hands on it. The second is Mahmoud Darwish, whose novels I just can't find anywhere. They seem pretty sold out everywhere. And the third name is Elias Khoury. And so I picked up this book a couple of months ago, and it is described on the back as the first magnum opus of the Palestinian saga. Khoury is a Lebanese author who is very highly regarded as both an author and an intellectual, especially as it concerns the history and the modern political climate around Palestine's struggle for freedom. This novel takes place around the 1948 Nakba, in which 700,000 Palestinians were forced to relocate. It seems like a very polyphonic novel where there's one character who tells a series of stories in a kind of stream of consciousness flow about all of these different experiences during the Nakba. And apparently a lot of these stories are derived from the sorts of stories that Khoury himself heard in Palestinian refugee camps. And so it seems really an epic for and of the Palestinian people. And with blurbs by people like Edward Said, it sounds like just as good a time as ever to get to this epic. Next on my list is City of Torment by Daniela Hodorova. This was published in English just a couple of years ago, I think in 2021, and I picked it up immediately upon release. And I've been dying to get to it though. For whatever reason, I keep pushing it off. I'm quite intimidated by this novel, actually. It looks dense, but I've heard really great things about it. This novel seems very much to be an epic of Prague, but with a magical and mythical bent rather than a realist one. Reading about this novel makes me think of Solenoid, as it seems that Hodrova is more interested in the myths, in the ghosts and the ephemera of Prague, and how all of that interplays with the history. It looks both in form and in subject to be quite experimental, inventive, and sprawling. It seems to play a lot with the living and the dead as coexisting in the same realm rather than in different realms. And this kind of haunting of history seems to be very much at the forefront of this epic novel. This is a behemoth book that seems unfortunately to have gone like pretty unnoticed in its release into English. It only has like a handful of reviews on Goodreads, so that might be a problem with Goodreads rather than the novel itself, or the promotion of it anyways. But this novel looks absolutely fantastic. Again, I've had this one on my nightstand like since it came out, and I've just been waiting for the right time to dig into this. So if you've read this one, please do let me know, because I could use the boost to finally get to this 550 or so page book. Number 13 on my list is Fernando del Paso's Palurino of Mexico. Fernando del Paso is an author I've been really interested in a while. I've had a copy of his News from the Empire for quite a few years, but I picked up this one just earlier this year, and it seems exactly like that kind of surrealistic, plotless, word-drunk novel filled with wordplay and references, etc., that I often adore falling into. Del Paso has often been compared to authors like Sterne and Rabelais and Joyce, and he still has some works that are untranslated into English. They seem borderline untranslatable, if you believe that that's a thing. But in each of these works, Del Paso seems to kind of create a new language, and through that new language, create the world. If you want a better understanding of this, I'll leave a great review of his novel, José Trio, by Andrey over at the Untranslated below. Andrey's review is quite good, so I'd highly recommend going to read that if this author interests you at all. That book, José Trio, looks absolutely wild. But it seems that Palurino of Mexico is about a medical student who just sort of wanders around Mexico City, and that's another one of my favorite kinds of genres, by the way. The unassuming main character who wanders around a major city. So yeah, I really want to get to this one soon, because I want to go into this without really any more context than that, because it seems that Fernando del Paso could be an all-time great. Right, just two left. Number 14 on my list is McIntosh, My Darling by Marguerite Young. So last summer, I was in a bookstore that was less of a bookstore and more of just a rundown house. This seems like a bad idea. Yeah, that's a bad idea. But the bookstore was completely falling apart, and there were just books everywhere. And I was digging around in there for a little bit while my wife was patiently waiting for me to be done. And I was on the bottom shelf, and I was pulling out all of these Stephen King books and putting them on the floor. And way back in the back of this shelf, laying on its side, was this copy of McIntosh, My Darling. It was a pretty good find and a good $10 well spent. But one of the reasons why this book has been on my mind lately, other than finding this pretty rare book in a random bookstore in upstate New York, is that Docky Archive is republishing this novel in 2024. It's been long out of print. And so I suspect that a lot of people will be discussing this novel in 2024. Originally published in 1965, this is Young's only novel. She was primarily a poet, and so this novel has that sort of prose poetry that you would expect from a novel written by a poet. This novel is often in that conversation of the great American novel, and whether that's due to it being almost 1,200 pages or that it truly captures America on that epic scale, we'll have to see. Though there are plenty of readers that I do trust who rank this novel among the very best of the 20th century. I'll leave an excellent review in The New Yorker by the literary critic Ryan Ruby, who writes brilliantly about this novel. And if this novel is half as brilliant as what he makes it sound like, then I'm sure this will be a great book. Okay, the last book, number 15, is The Stones of Summer by Dow Mossman. I actually found this book in the same bookstore in upstate New York, just like a shelf or two over from Miss MacIntosh, My Darling, which isn't too crazy of a find. This novel isn't super rare, and I didn't know of the novel beforehand, but that struck me as a good opportunity to finally buy it and put it on my shelf, and I've been dying to get to it ever since. Mossman is an author who fascinates me because he only ever wrote a single book. He published this novel when he was like 29, suffered some health issues, ended up in health facilities, seemingly due to writing and or publishing this novel, and after that experience, he never wrote another novel again. And this novel quickly fell into obscurity. It did have a resurgence in the early 2000s, though, due to a documentary called Stone Reader by Mark Moskowitz, which I have it on good authority that documentary is fantastic, though. I'm thinking I'm not going to watch it until after I read or am in the middle of reading this novel. The Stones of Summer follows the life of a rather ordinary person in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so it seems rather mundane, but what draws me to this novel is how people have spoken about Mossman's prose as being quite sumptuous. Let me actually just read the first couple of sentences to give you an idea. When August came, thick as a dream of falling timbers, Dawes Williams and his mother would pick Simpson up at his office, and then they would drive west all evening, the sun before them dying like the inside of a stone melon, split and watery, having with blood. Yeah, I mean, I could keep reading, but the prose just sounds absolutely wonderful. And if this interests you at all, I would highly recommend checking out George Salas over at the Kaleidoscope, interviewed Dow Mossman and did a review of this novel as well. Dow Mossman is very hard to get in touch with, apparently, and so this interview is one of the few with him in recent years, perhaps the only one in recent years. But yeah, this novel sounds fantastic. It sounds really fascinating. I'll leave a link to George Salas's review and interview down below if this sounds good to you. Right, so there are 15 books. As always, I have like a dozen or so more big books that are vaguely on my TBR, but these are the ones that I think I want to prioritize in 2024. But who knows, maybe in 2024 I'll finally get to Gravity's Rainbow or The Recognitions or any of the half dozen or so William T. Vollmann novels on my shelves, or maybe I'll get back to Proust, or if there's also the Garden of Seven Twilights by Miguel del Palo that came out just this past year. God, I have so much reading to get to. Anyways, let me know if you have read any of these books or if you're planning to read any of these books. And let me know what you think about them. I could use the encouragement. And as always, I hope that just by talking about some of these books, they put these books on other people's radars and starts conversations about them. So let me know your thoughts. Here's to 2024. Thanks for watching.